Unleash your inner strength to beat fatigue with Patriox liquid oxygen. Pure spring water, oxygenated for ultimate vitality. Refresh, detox, and empower your freedom-fighting spirit. Use my special discount code to get 10% off any product. It's patriox.us/Tron. Boost your immune system with Patriox as well. The oxygenated water designed for resilience and vitality in every sip. Welcome back, listeners of the Randomness of Nothing podcast with your host, Rashad Woods. As always, we always dive deep into interesting people that they carved out their own niche and path in their careers to help people and find processes and efficiencies in the world around them. This person epitomizes it from actually my home state of Michigan, just outside of Detroit, in Detroit, Michigan, now in Atlanta. Robin Harris, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
It's very much of a pleasure. So you have a very interesting career arc. Now you're a former ordained minister. You're also a technologist, and now you've created your own company to really actually hone the human path in life and to make sure that people are utilizing their full self.
Yes.
I'd love to hear more about that.
Yes, I'm currently ordained minister, but my ministry, Interfaith, has never been about religion. It's always been about human potential.
Beautiful.
And that has always been something that has been very close to my heart. Mm-hmm. And it spans spiritual all the way into where we are right now in the age of AI. It's really going to be important for humans to, weigh in and decide, not let a few people make decisions for the whole, but humanity needs to make some decisions about how we protect humanity.
Do you find that, as anybody who's seen various levels of technology, and it's always been get on the bus, so to speak, and adapt, or just have to deal with it. Do you find this era of technology a little bit different in this than you've seen in the past?
It is very different. It is very different. And I have some very strong opinions about it. I've been in the tech industry for over 25 years. Mm-hmm. And I've had to pivot my career multiple times because this is just an industry that has those changing directions all the time,
For sure. Absolutely.
But now what I'm seeing is the technology has been released in the wild, in my opinion, prematurely. Mm-hmm. It's in the hands of a lot of people who don't understand the power and the risk. Mm-hmm. And then we just have to deal with the unethical use of it. Mm-hmm. There are so many things that can go wrong with this technology that we should have built the guardrails while we were developing the technology. You don't bolt security on after the fact. That doesn't work. Yeah. So that's kind of what I see is we're going to be like, oh, crap.
Right.
And then we're going to be running around like crazy people trying to plug dams we could have built infrastructure for.
Yeah, it's very tough, I think, because, we have 50 autonomous states and to try to build a national policy on technology, because obviously everybody wants to be at the forefront of things. And there's various industries that want to have, their dip their toes in their hands and have well-trained people and be ahead of that curve. So I think, the good intention of it was kind of take a laid back approach, and then it was self-govern itself, right? Or that people... Right. That's the approach, right? But similar to different industries, like when YouTube first came out, YouTube had to go through copyright issues to then get the permission of respective, media outlets, television, artists to then actually be, collaborative with those respective parties, as opposed to just being the wherewithal where you can just upload whatever you want without compensation to the rights owners. So similar to what, AI is, there has to be some sort of guardrails that doesn't also stifle creativity. So I certainly agree with that regard, right?
Yes.
It can't just be all or nothing, so to speak.
Yes, correct. And another thing, I think we're being sold something. We're being sold something, and the motivation is profits. It's not about what the technology is actually capable of. The technology has amazing potential, but it's still in its infancy.
Right.
And so there's this whole over marketing at such a high level that industries and businesses are trying to just force it down the public's throat, even when the public is saying, oh, hold on now.
Right.
Hold on. We don't want AI in everything. AI doesn't need to be in everything. I don't have a use case for it here, and here. So it's sort of like, yeah, but we want to make money. And for us to make money, we need you to, use this tool in everything. It's like, no, sorry. So this is the problem Microsoft is coming up with, is because I'm not upgrading my laptop because no.
I think that there's a very big, it's certainly like anybody who's ever tried, the beginning of artificial intelligence, like it's been around for, all the sci-fi books have been around for hundreds of years,
Right,
we could always, look at Jetsons and things like that. But even spell check was artificial intelligence. I think I think the issue that people have is that sometimes, how is privacy being protected? How is copyright being protected? How are, musical performers and now you have script writers that were potentially, that's what they had the Hollywood strike over, right?
Yes,
so that whole idea of like, okay, can you write a script? Because at the end of the day, when you compose a piece of music, yeah, you can put some lyrics inside of artificial intelligence. And for the people who are listening, I'm not anti, technology. Like, this is not that conversation. I'm not a Luddite here. But I certainly think that there are some very valid points to how far this technology is going to go, because typically what happens is companies tend to overcorrect when it comes to something brand new. And then they have to certainly scale back because not everybody wanted to adopt to it, right? So, and I think that knowing where this is going, because listen, I mean, we've all been AI, deep faked on the internet. You're like, wow, that looks really, really, really real.
Yes.
And then you found out that it wasn't. So, we can laugh at it, but it certainly does need to be some sort of governance. Is it used in certain situations? Is it not used in certain situations? Is there going to be a disclaimer in the lower left-hand corner that this was generated by artificial intelligence and this is not real? Because that'll help people under certain situations, right?
Right.
There's,
right. And there's security. Just, I saw this thing about, what is this chat bot supposedly for AI agents. I think it's just another thing of hype. And what is the purpose of this? What is the business purpose of a tool like this, that chat bots that you've been given access to your private business and stuff are now out interacting, and they had all kinds of security violations. They had all kinds of vulnerable code in their GitHub, depositories and stuff like that. And it's like, because the person who created it is not a person that understands the secure development life cycle. So when you have, that's like saying, let's everybody be a surgeon. But we didn't go to medical school and we don't even understand biology.
I think, one of the things that people, when they've gotten used to technology, and I know it's an oft-used quote, it says, if it's free, you're not the customer, you're the product being sold, right?
Yes.
And that's very true, because now you have a situation where literally anything that you actually search, look up, is immediately other relevant items being used in real time, and full disclosure, I mean, how many times have you gotten a phone or gotten a brand new thing and you scroll right through the terms of service just so you can get the agree checkbox? You don't know what you actually really gave away in that process. And more than likely, you didn't care. But you do care when you start getting all those unsolicited emails in the back end, and then everything starts showing up in your feed of everything you talked about and discussed. And you're like, hold on.
Yes.
It definitely plays to, I sold my information. I did it willingly. And now I'm living with the consequences of it as a result, and that's the truth.
And not only you, but I in businesses, we would do third-party security assessments, because a business that's governing itself properly knows that when you bring a third party into your business, you're bringing their risk.
Correct.
And so now you need to assess, can I afford to do business with them?
Without question.
Am I exposing myself to unnecessary risk? And so we look at those privacy policies, those terms. what kind of security certifications. Do you have ISO? Do you have SOC 1? Let me see your report, because I want to know what findings or where you have weaknesses. And then the companies are sending you their security requests because and this is not something the individual thinks about, but do you know that when you're installing some of these apps and you're using this, do you know you're giving them irrevocable access to use your content for whatever they want to use? You just uploaded pictures of your grandchildren. You just uploaded, intellectual property. You gave them irrevocable access. So now humans that didn't necessarily have to be that security conscious, everybody's got to bump up. Everybody's got to level up. Grandma's going to have to level up.
Yeah, for sure. And, the reality about it is that I think that, there's an assumption that everybody is very well versed in the process. I mean, you never write your social security number on a billboard, right? You would never, you're insane. I would never do that. But you would, give all your information out to a social media app and, and willingly do it. The straddle the line to it, however, the flip side to it is that in order to grow, you do have to give up that information to a degree.
Some of it.
Right. Some,
and you got to give it up to the right. You want to give it up to good stewards.
Right. And so, and then you don't know who they're giving that information to as well. Right.
Yes.
So, here I am on a podcast. There's no way to grow a podcast without utilizing the technologies that are at the disposal to grow a podcast. There's no newspaper that I can, suddenly say, oh, I'm just going to be on the newspaper. And, that's all she wrote.
Right.
Even the most anti-technology person in entertainment, Charles Barkley, got on Instagram at some point, kicking and screaming because he's a public figure and he stayed off social media for years. And then finally he's on Instagram because his business partner said there are opportunities that you simply cannot get without having access to these platforms. Right. So, and he got dragged along, kicking and screaming. Right. So I guess the answer is the genie's out of the bottle. And maybe because now states and local governments are trying to grasp their way around this and put some sort of protections in place for the end user and businesses as well too.
Mm-hmm. And it's interesting because the United States does not prioritize the individual's rights when it comes to this. We don't have anything that really speaks to privacy. So each of the states is having to deal with this on their own. Mm-hmm. And this is what makes it complicated for businesses, because now I got to look at what's going on with each state. Whereas if we took the standard and came up with the right level of standard and made it universal as far as federal, that would ease some of the burden for the businesses, but we don't want to do that. So each state is just dealing with it as best they can. And now you've got the federal government coming saying, no, we don't want you to regulate this. Well, why not?
I think it gets complicated. And, one thing I've always tried to do, at least on this show, is ask questions. So it's never been a political show, right? This isn't a political question because, this is a technology question. But I think one of the reasons that they do that is because, it'd be like if you have, Google and Microsoft in your backyard, it's very hard to want to be at the forefront. Let's just call it for what it is. It's going to be very hard for you to pass a law that could prohibit or hinder their business, right? So
the EU did it.
Yeah, I can't. That's again, I can't speak on that, but I think it gets complicated, when it comes to those regards because each state has its own regulatory bodies and they're autonomous, so to speak. So I think that. I guess I don't know the answer to it because, each state has its own respective government and they think that they can, regulate their industries best.
I don't think the states are doing it because they want to. They're doing it because they need to fill a void.
That is true. Oh, for sure.
They need to fill a void. The states are more connected to their citizens.
Absolutely.
More connected to their citizens.
Absolutely.
And they're more good stewards of their well-being to certain extent. So where there's a void, they have to step in.
Right.
But the problem is now if Google has to deal with 50 different
Right.
policies
They have to go to
instead
the
of
legal
just
team.
one,
They have to go to their legal team to every single. Yeah, I mean,
that's a harder sell.
it's multi-layered, right? You know.
Yes, that's a harder sell for the businesses.
Absolutely.
And if you think about what the credit card industries did. If you think about Visa and MasterCard, this is what I said. It would have made more sense if the industries self-regulated and came up with a standard for a win-win. Let's come up with a standard for a win-win where we're not throwing the consumer under the bus, but we're also allowing ourselves to thrive.
Okay.
And let's create a standard. So now the credit cards, and this is in self-interest. You have to go through, you're going to be using Visa and MasterCard or whatever on your website or whatever. Oh, PCI.
Right.
They're not playing.
No.
They're not playing.
No.
And you have to do attestations, and if you're a certain level, you have to do certain audits and different things like that, because they understand that we're not going to wait for somebody else to put these in place, because it's in our best interest that we do it.
That makes and there's certainly a very good place to say that, because at the end of the day, then you can get favorable terms. You can say, listen, we've already, willingly just did this information because we know this is coming down the pipeline, so to speak. So we've already put up these, potential pratfalls. And it's not like there's not a history of brand new technologies that knew that they needed to protect themselves from liability, from other, very, very, or overreaching things that they feel are overreaching. So they're like, listen, let's just do this in our best interest, because, things can change at the whim of a hat, right? And unfortunately, and then the other thing that you have to worry about too, I still want to dive into, a lot of the other things that you've accomplished is it keeps out the bad actors early, right? So it keeps out the bad actors early, right? Because I think it's very important, like, hey, let's do this now, because then we can show that if there is somebody with ill intentions, that's not in the process efficiencies, that's not into, making, the necessary adjustments for businesses and people to do things in a more concise and precise manner. I want to keep out the people that are going to really bring my industry down to its knees, so to speak, right?
Yes.
And that's very
the bad actors.
Oh my goodness. So you also have some companies as well too, and so you're a certified hypnotherapist as well too.
Yes.
I got to be honest with you, this is one of the more fascinating conversations I've had. Like, you're deep. I'm like, yo, you're deep. And you have the 3 hellos. I mean that very, very sincerely too. So can you tell us about the 3 hellos?
Well, 3 hellos, I've always kind of brought my whole self to my profession. I love what I do. I bring my whole self, and part of that self is a spiritual platform, a spiritual belief system that looks for the operating in the greater good and in the best interest of not just myself, but humanity. And so that is how I perform even my technology work. What I do is important to protect companies and customers and employees and this type of thing. But in terms of hypnotherapy, what I've discovered is that our minds are so powerful. And when we don't know how to manage this power, then what happens? We mismanage it. What happens? We let other people influence us in ways that's not in our best interest.
And I just have to jump in because, and I say this respectfully, it's because you have so many information that is passed so fast to you now. You can't even process. Like, we live in this flash in the pan moment, right? Where we click on something really quick because the thumbnail looked really good, right? And we haven't even processed whether or not that's valid information or not, but it just looked visually appealing to us.
Right.
And now people are playing on that emotion of you.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, advertisers understand how the human mind works, and how they use that information is not in our best good. It's just to get us to click, to buy, to comply. So we are being manipulated by an industry that has learned about this power, and they're using it. I'm not gonna badmouth them for doing that. But why aren't we learning about this power and using it for our own good, to protect ourselves, to make sure we're raising our children where they can be more discerning? Why aren't we learning about our power and then taking control of it?
I think because, and I've never debated on this show, but I think when it comes to a business, it's more or less the lines of I have a product or service for sale, and it's up to this is the part where people, for lack of a better term, like if it's a red hot chili pepper, I love that group, by the way, and you have to decide whether or not that's going to burn your tongue, right? And so the onus is on the user end, and as long as I didn't have a product that was mislabeled, was as long as I told you that it was going to burn the tip of your mouth and to not refrigerate it, not put it in certain areas to explode or mix it with certain things, then it's on you. I have that little label on the side of it. You need to make sure you use it under the right terms and conditions of how it was supposed to be utilized. And I think that's how a lot of products are. Basically, you better look. You have to read this for yourself.
But I'm talking about advertising in general. Yes. I'm not talking about any specific business. What I'm saying is they understand the psychology of influence. They understand how to program the mind. And what we haven't done, and I'm not saying anything about them. What I'm saying is, why are we not learning? The data is out there. We know how humans learn. We know how humans unlearn. We know how humans are programmed. Yeah. We know that when humans are overloaded with information, this is hypnotherapy, they become more suggestible, but to the negative, because now our primitive mind becomes more heightened and agitated, and we're suggestible to the negative. This is how we get such a polarized, political environment, because they know how to push those buttons. They just push buttons.
I gotta ask, because you're so well versed in these fields. What's your background beyond? Like, how did you get into this type of field to start learning all this information? I was trying to find it, and I've never quite had a background like this on the show, and all the time I've been doing this show, and I think this is wonderful that you know all this.
Interestingly enough, I'm a PK, preacher's kid. I was raised in the church.
Okay.
And sitting at the dining room table with my dad, Bibles, concordances, and all kinds of stuff. And there, in interfaith, you look at across many different religions, and you'll see, there's a thread that's running through all of them. Oh, this said the same thing. This said this. There's wisdom that's old. It's ancient, that talks about, basically, as we think and we emotionalize,
of course,
we're actually creating.
Right.
We're influencing what we will allow to be filtered through into our reality. And then we start making decisions based on the things that we let in. And we distort, we generalize, and we delete. That's how the mind works. So the ancients figured this out. This is why they're saying, hey, you need to be aware of what you're exposing your mind to. You need to be aware of what thoughts you are rehearsing over and over and over and over again. So those are principles, and you can find them in different texts, but you can find them in the Bible about the power of belief, the power of the mind, where we need to focus our mind. That's all there. Now you get into neuroscience, and it's like, oh, I see. Yeah. These people understood this. They didn't have science. They just understood it. But now we have the science that validates it. And I have a master's in instructional design. And when I was going through, it was called human performance technology.
Wow.
Because there's a technology about how to get humans to perform at their highest. Mm-hmm. We understand. There is a lot I don't even understand why our schools look the way they look, when we've understood for years that many of the things we do in the educational system don't produce the most advanced human.
Do you when you know what's so fascinating about when it comes to human potential is if anybody who's ever watched like a documentary of when they created things in ancient times, like they had no book, they had no reference, they had what you would say primitive tools, and they made things to the millimeter of how they needed to be
Yes.
built. And you like literally like the aqueducts, the pyramids, and you're just like, how in the world was it possible with no reference book did you know how to do this, right?
I'll tell you how it was possible. I'll tell you. Now we get into the spiritual thing. We're connected to something that's infinite. All that knowledge is there. When people say, well, if science can't prove it, it's real. I said, so I guess electricity wasn't real until science proved it. Please, that's not a logical. That is not a logical argument. Science becomes more sophisticated. Now it can go see things that it couldn't see before. It can go measure things that it couldn't measure before. We are connected to something that's beyond us that we don't understand. You can call it whatever you want to call it, but it keeps planets in orbit.
Yeah.
It grows trees.
Yeah. Very true.
It creates, it's created everything. And we don't understand it, but all that knowledge is there. We just have to rise to the point where we can tap into it. And there were some individuals through their practices, because they didn't have all these distractions.
That is true. That is very true. And they decided to
They
make
had
sure.
a more of a communication and a connection with that intuitive channel. Without intuition, we're going to be in a lot of trouble, because
Well, they had
sometimes
to.
I remember reading about some lady that encountered Jeffrey Dahmer, and
Mm.
he was pretending to be paralyzed in a wheelchair, and he needed help with his books, get them in the car, and she was going to go help them, and something said no. Mm-mm.
Wow.
And she walked away from that situation, but she was being primed to be a victim,
Oh my goodness.
and her intuition
Yeah. Cool.
interfered with that. Her intuition tapped her on the shoulder like, no. So we there are so many things we don't understand. And I really love in with if you look at artificial intelligence, we can actually use it to learn something about our own mind. It's not a living thing. It's not intelligent, but it's a model. But do you know humans hallucinate?
Oh, for
We
sure.
hallucinate. And prompt engineering, the prompts that we have are our thoughts and our emotions. Those prompts are going into the ethers, and they're going to produce something.
Right.
At the very least, chemicals in our body, right?
Right.
That are either good for us or not good for us.
Right. And that ultimately will give the outcome, bad or good or bad, of what is resulted of that. What
Right.
what services, because obviously you're very very involved and very passionate about these respective topics, what do you service businesses, individuals, one-on-one sessions with the services that you provide? Because I saw that you have
I
sessions and
work
courses and things like that.
Yes, I work with clients. The clients that I work with one on one, what they're working on is some of them are very successful, but there's that next level. And the way humans are, we always have to have another breakthrough,
Oh
another
yeah.
breakthrough, another breakthrough.
Oh yeah.
Well, it turns out that hypnotherapy and some cognitive um, um, practices, and also some project management tools can help us have those
For
breakthroughs
sure. For sure.
easier. So I work with clients that are trying to, like, okay, I'm hitting this wall, I'm hitting this wall, I'm hitting this wall. And I want to get my business to the next level.
Right. I
Why
think
am
it's
I hitting this wall?
Yeah. And it could be something so simple as, it's like I always call it the eating your own food theory, right? So you think your food tastes the best until, you have a guest over or you cook for somebody else and you're like, man, you really dropped the ball. Like, you're my friend and all, but this doesn't taste as good as you think that it does. So sometimes they need somebody like yourself to be able to tell them that this is what you're missing, and you may not even see it. You're too close to actually acknowledge the hole in the
Mhm.
situation, right? And then it becomes something that they have to be passionate about to work on, because it is so competitive to grow and for businesses to consistently make sales, get return on investment, be profitable. What you did last month does not matter. What you did
Yes.
last week
Yes.
does not matter. And it's funny you
Yes.
say, I always bring my martial arts background up on my show, right? It's like, okay, what's the next thing? Like I have a black belt, in karate,
Okay.
right? And
Okay.
but it was always okay now. But I study new styles because what's the next challenge? I'm not out there like
Yes.
I'm not out there looking to start fights, but it's like, okay, what's the next style that I can learn from scratch? Because
Yeah.
I felt as though like I had done this really well for a long time, and now it just became another challenge to do something else. So that's a
Right.
great analogy about consistently pushing yourself. And I love what you put on
Mm-hmm.
your website when it said life is an ocean of possibility and we only show up with a teaspoon. Like, right.
Oh my gosh.
I
Yes.
was like, dang.
Yes.
I said, yeah, you're only using like a very small percentage of your true human potential.
Yes. Yes.
I thought that was beautiful.
And I also work with people who are transitioning. Like, okay, I did this, I hit a home run, but what's next? So they're moving from one career into another. And I have a lot of experience with pivoting in
Oh,
careers.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, your
And
background
then
speaks to it. Yeah.
yes, yes. And then working with businesses, I still love technology. And I'm committed, especially in this AI era, that we have businesses that know how to use it ethically,
Right.
safely, and where it makes sense.
Well, I think too is that when you talk about evolving, right? You look at a company like the great, like Apple, right? Like they literally were like, we're just going to focus on the home PC market, right? And then eventually, once they ran into that rough patch when Microsoft kind of skyrocketed up, they said, okay, well, we're going to pivot towards the devices, right? Because there
Mhm.
was a hole that was available for like the iPads and the entertainments. So
Mhm.
they pivot where they saw that okay, we're out of the home PC market, so to speak, when it came to Office Suite, even though they're still very dominant when it comes to graphics and things like that. But businesses are really like Microsoft based systems because of Office and because of Outlook and all those things. But they turned in the corner of okay, your phones, your entertainment. Then it became TV. So they always evolve. So all these things keep evolving because number one, your stakeholders depend on you evolving and giving the next product. And now that the phone market is saturated, they pivot to television, right? Because they're like,
Mhm.
okay, well now that we've done the phone market, now we need to pivot to devices and we need to sign things to like MLB television. So every time that they've reached a plateau, so to speak, of a market, they pivot to something else because there's
Yes.
availability there, and it's like, whoa,
Yes.
I didn't know you had your
Yes.
tentacles in that, but they still have to survive and be a viable entity.
Yes. A lot of individuals and some businesses don't realize that they need to keep reinventing themselves. And not, I want to caution people from chasing trends
Right.
and the fast, shiny thing, because all those people that went out west for the gold rush, who made the majority of the money? Small number of people made the money, and the
Right.
people selling the picks and the axes, right? So this is the same thing. You have to have wisdom, some wisdom, and then you have to stay true to your fundamentals. Don't compromise
Right.
your ethics and your vision and your mission. Don't compromise that. Don't sell yourself out, because in the end, the universe, life, the markets are going to shake the tree, and all the rotten apples are going to fall off.
Oh, there's no question. Right. I mean, it's very important, so to speak, to there's a reason. I don't know if you like it's the first fast food restaurant actually that served burgers was White Castle in this country. I don't know if you knew
Mm.
about. Yeah. So,
I
but
love White Castle.
right, right. A lot of people. I don't eat there, so I'm not hating. I just don't eat there, right? So,
Mhm.
but like they never once the reason why they've been around is because they're still a privately held company. They never tried to be McDonald's. Like once McDonald's, like think of all the fast food chains that have come and gone and been successful, flamed out. Like they're still like this little private company because they're a niche, right? They don't franchise, right? They're still privately held. They sell their product
Oh, I
like in
love
stores
that.
and everything like that. But more importantly, they knew what they were and what they weren't. And they said, if we try to scale to the length of McDonald's and get in a big competitor with Ray Kroc, we're going to get swallowed whole. We can't compete on that level. And so they stayed respectively who they were. And I think their customer base respected that because they have a very, very dedicated consumer base that knows, oh, I'm going to White Castle. It's 12 o'clock at night. I've had, I partied late at night where I can buy these, these sliders at Kroger or my local grocery store. So, but it's knowing your lane, right? And not trying to be anything that you're not, but still evolving. So their evolution was getting in grocery stores as opposed to trying to get into the toy business, right?
Right.
Because they're not going to compete on that scale.
I also think that with the way technology is going, there's an opportunity for the small and medium-sized business.
Without question.
I think we're coming to an era where the mega business, just like I'm gonna leave that alone. That big business and all this other kind of stuff, I think that era is coming to a close, except in a few places where they need that kind of breadth of a coverage. But I think the era of the small and the medium business is gonna be like, that's where I think the magic is going to happen, because they can adapt easier. They stay closer to their customers and they're more embedded in their communities. So there's more of a connection. Don't lose that connection.
But I think big companies are very, very smart too, in the fact that they'll buy that company, back that small company, and you won't even know that that's that big company behind that at the same time. So like,
if they do it well,
so like, so you're sitting there using for example, if you're not using a certain cell phone carrier, I'll just use the smaller cell phone carrier. Yeah, but if you look at the bottom, like, in the little corner, that's presented by like the big cell phone company, but they left them at their own vices to be locally serviced to you. Right, because they knew
if they do it well.
Yeah. I think it's just funny, right? Because you'll all of a sudden say, "Oh man, this is a little small wireless carrier, that serves regionally," and you're like, "No, they're actually part of a bigger company." To your point, they're still small and nimble regards to their company customers. Right. I guess at the end of the day, technology has to be used responsibly. It has to, have some guardrails, and there's very few people that I've had on this show, and I've had a lot of guests that really have the background that you have. This has been one of the more fascinating conversations. And I mean that from the heart, because you got a lot of substance, and I've been waiting for this one for a long time, and you've certainly exceeded my expectations of this conversation. This has been absolutely amazing.
Thank you.
And
it's been great.
It blew my mind. It definitely, I think I'm going to, shut off a few things right now and beef up my privacy on a couple different devices,
right? Yes, definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely.
So, where can people find Robin Harris, please?
Well, I have one resource that I think is particularly important across the board. Is called climbrightmountain.com.
Okay.
And the concept is you climb in this mountain, but if you don't pay attention, you'll get to the top and be like, oh crap. This wasn't what I expected. This wasn't where I needed to take my business. This wasn't where I needed to take my life. My mountain's over there. So proactively, there are some things we can do to make sure when we're doing all of this planning and being ambitious and, taking our business to the next level, that we are climbing the right mountain. Yeah. And this is for your profession, your personal life, and your business.
Beautiful. And, I've always been a big fan of people who like to meet human potential. I've always been a big fan of people who don't, the world around them is not just the gas station, at the corner. It's beneath the surface, so to speak, and there's deeper things, and you are capable more than just, it's one thing to read a book. It's another thing to understand the context of what you've read. And, that's one of the reasons why this show was created, was to get to these deeper conversations and talk to people like yourself. And, I think you're a walking, breathing, like documentary kind of like ocean of knowledge. And, I think that's why we hit it off so well. So I just want to personally thank you for everything that you've offered on this episode.
Thank you for having me.
It's been an absolute honor. Robin Harris on the Randomness of Nothing podcast with your host, Rashad Woods. If you like more, please hit the subscribe button. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Wow, that was